A fragile ceasefire hangs by a thread in the Middle East as Washington and Tehran remain locked in a dangerous standoff. The aftershocks of the war continue to expose the widening cracks in the so-called rules-based international order. While the United States speaks of de-escalation, its naval blockade and wavering military backing for Israel and continued bombardments across the region tell a very different story. Tonight, we examine a rapidly shifting geopolitical landscape. Pakistan has emerged as an unlikely mediator, stepping in where Western diplomacy has failed, carrying urgent messages to Tehran in a desperate attempt to prevent a full-scale regional inferno. At the same time, an increasingly isolated Washington appears forced to seek diplomatic breathing room through Beijing, even as panic quietly spreads inside the American establishment over depleted weapons stockpiles and the growing strain on its Indo-Pacific strategy. As energy markets tremble and the global south watches what many describe as Western double standards unfold in real time, critical questions now dominate the global stage. Is the United States sinking deeper into a strategic quagmire? And is Washington risking its own global hegemony in pursuit of Israel's expanding regional war objectives? Our panel of experts on All 24 News Special break down the contradictions, the Trump-Xi summit fallout, the fragile truce now holding by thread, and the economic and geopolitical tremors shaping the next phase of this escalating crisis. All this and more shortly. Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to All 24 News Special with me, Karim Fazakari. And before we bring in our panel of experts, let us look at the ground reality.
On February 28th, the world woke up to the news of a new war in the Middle East launched by the US and the Zionist entity after rounds of negotiations that produced no breakthrough. The joint attacks killed Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei along with other senior military commanders and high-ranking intelligence officials, opening a new chapter of bloodshed in the region. Among the very first victims of the joint offensive was a girls' primary school in Minab, southern Iran. 168 were killed, and most of them were children. Iran's retaliation was immediate, launching missiles and drones toward the occupied Palestinian territories and US military bases across the Gulf region. The Strait of Hormuz became the next battlefield as Iran moved to block the strategic choke point critical to global energy and fertilizer supplies. In response, the US president threatened to destroy Iranian civilian infrastructure if Tehran did not reopen the strait, saying a whole civilization will die by the evening of April 7th. On April the 8th, the two sides reached a temporary ceasefire that was expected to include Lebanon, but within 10 minutes, the Zionist forces unleashed nearly 100 airstrikes, leaving hundreds dead. Pakistan then emerged as the principal mediator in an effort to halt the war, hosting direct talks on April 11th and 12th in Islamabad. The talks, however, proved futile, prompting the US to impose a naval blockade on Iran. To date, despite continued diplomatic efforts under Pakistani mediation, no breakthrough has been achieved. The main sticking point in the negotiations remain Iran's nuclear program, the lifting of sanctions, the release of frozen assets, oil exports, control of the Strait of Hormuz, and an end to the Zionist war on Lebanon, which has already killed thousands and displaced millions. 100 days into the conflict, tensions remain high and the ceasefire continues to show its fragility day by day. Late on Saturday, US forces intercepted 2 Iranian drones near the Strait of Hormuz after downing 4 others and struck Iranian coastal radar sites in renewed escalation. In response, Iran launched retaliatory attacks against US bases in Kuwait and Bahrain. So far, the war has sent shockwaves through the global economy, unsettling industries from energy market to tourism and leaving the region on edge.
To dissect the military, economic, and political dimensions of this crisis, I am joined tonight by an esteemed panel of international experts. First, Devasha Pant, geopolitical analyst, joining us from London. Hello there, ma'am, and thank you for agreeing to be with us.
Thank you so much.
And we're also honored to have Dr. Anasat Tekriti, founder and CEO of the Cordoba Foundation and a leading political analyst, also from London. Hello there, doctor, and thank you for being with us again.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Karim. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're also pleasure to have Ambassador Batu Kutilia, Senior Fellow and Geopolitical Analyst at the Delphi Global Research Center. He joins us from Washington, D.C. Hello there, sir, and thank you for being with us.
Hello, thanks for inviting. It's a pleasure to be with you.
The pleasure is all ours. And we also have Dr. Khodr Zarour, expert in MENA, U.S. foreign policy, strategy, and international security at NC State University from Raleigh. Hello there, Professor, and thank you for being with us.
Hello, thanks for having me.
All right, let's begin from the very beginning. And here I start with you, Mr. Anas Takriti. So technically, we are hearing of breaking news. Actually, Israel reported that Iran launched new missiles. The first attack after a 2 months, let's say, truce. And now President Donald Trump is saying, reportedly, that he was about to call Benjamin Netanyahu and tell him not to strike back. How would you read this development?
I mean, obviously this is an escalation of sorts, but it falls within the context of a war where very few people, I would suggest, even the most ardent of experts, would be able to describe either as being an ongoing war, or whether it's a ceasefire of sorts, or whether it's a truce, or whether it's a pause in hostility. It's a situation where I don't recall a similar one in recent memory. But in any case, I would suggest that the reasons for this Iranian attack is because they have come to the realization that most of us, I believe, were aware of, and that is it's virtually impossible to negotiate with the Americans and the Israelis. It's almost impossible. You never know where you are. Are you actually negotiating with the President of the United States, or is it Israel who are pulling the strings? What kind of terms are we talking about, and do those terms include Lebanon? That's a phase that we went through, and it proved a failure. So exactly what is it that the Americans want from the Iranians? And what do the Iranians want, the bare minimum, so that they don't seem to have collapsed and totally surrendered to the Americans? It's an impossible negotiations. And the thing with Israel, and this is something that I've written about and spoken about now for several years, and that is the gift that the international community continues to give Israel is the gift of time. It's not about weapons, it's not about aid, it's not about public support, it's about time. And throughout any kind of negotiations, any kind of so-called peace settlement or peace negotiations, any kind of negotiation regarding the surrender of arms or any kind of buffer zones or the like, the fact is that Israel, the most precious commodity it is gaining is time. And again, in regards with these negotiations, whilst the Iranians were fretting, whilst the Americans wanted to settle in any way that would allow them to save face while pulling out, the Israelis were having fun. And they were doing what they want to do. They were expanding to the south of Lebanon. They captured land that any other negotiation wouldn't have given them. And the continuous erasure of Gaza goes on unabated. So basically, the only winner in this particular scenario is Israel. So I believe that the Iranians have given up waiting for some sort of solid ground on which the Americans could base any negotiations, and have launched this attack in order to force their hand to bring them back to the negotiation table. Because, I mean, let's be honest, neither Iran nor the United States actually want these hostilities to continue. They can't afford to, whether in America because of internal pressure, or whether it be in Iran because this is piling on above the sanctions that have been imposed for over 40 years and the brutal targeting of the most advanced weaponry there is. They want the end to these hostilities. It's only the Israelis that want to continue. So Iran have launched their attack, and I understand that Hezbollah and Iranian allies in southern Lebanon have also launched attacks to the north of Israel. We'll see whether the Iranian plan comes to fruition and whether the Americans do call a cease to the hostilities and head back to the negotiation table.
Amazing. What about you, Dr. Zarour? Would you agree with this analysis and the fact that Iran is firing these missiles at Israel after it attacked Beirut and escalated in southern Lebanon, as Dr. Anas Takriti was saying?
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. Well, I think the Trump administration and Mr. Netanyahu wanted to separate the Lebanese file from the Iranian negotiations. The attack by the Israelis this morning in suburbs of Beirut, basically Iran had to retaliate because they wanted to relink those two files together. The Iranian influence have been withering in Lebanon for the last several months. In fact, 2 days ago, the Lebanese president had made that very clear that Iran or Lebanon doesn't belong to Iran. It's a separate entity. The Iranians don't represent the Lebanese. So he made it very clear. And I think the Iranians are responding to the Israeli attack and responding to the Lebanese president by saying, we still have influence, we still reign in most of Lebanon, and we will establish our relationship with Hezbollah. We will continue to support the group. We will continue to support their expansionist policy, not only in Lebanon, but beyond. Yemen continues to be a card the Iranians hold. They made kind of signaling the other day that Bab el-Mandeb is still under their control and they may use it. In fact, the Iraqi Hezbollah earlier this afternoon said that if the U.S. strikes Iran, then they will also retaliate. So we'll go back to square one to February 28th of this year. So yeah, I do agree that I think the Iranians really wanted to reassert themselves. I don't think the Trump administration has the stomach to continue this war, as we have seen on Wednesday, or maybe Wednesday, I think, when the U.S. House of Representatives decided to defund this continuing war against Iran.
Mm-hmm. And now let me turn to Ambassador Batok-Tilia. Mr. Ambassador, how would you read this development? How deep is the United States is in this trouble of escalation by Israel or by Netanyahu's government? And how would you read this escalation, or how would you justify this escalation by the part of Iran? Is it linked to the situation in Lebanon, or it's something else?
Once again, this escalation or the recent development in Middle East, what we see is a symptom of a much bigger and wider systemic problem of the rules-based international order that started eroding maybe 2 decades ago. And we cannot find the correct answers until we analyze the correct roots of this problem. And correct roots is that aggressive revisionist powers like Russia started undermining the global order and openly declaring it. We all remember in 2007, Putin himself announced the aggressive revisionism in Munich Security Conference. And unfortunately, the international security system nor individual countries were ready or unable to react properly. And then we saw gradual erosion of this system. And this erosion, of course, has a spillover effect. So whether it's in Russian invasion in Georgia, annexation of Crimea 2014, or full-scale war, and also the ability of the rogue actors like Russia or Iran using the proxy players to advance their strategic interests, really generates the type of cracks in the global order, rules-based international order, which unfortunately is gone. And now we see that individual players are trying to maximize their hand in a future possible world order. which some of them see it's based on the more spheres of influence or dominating their neighbors or projecting force where they can. And we clearly see that was the intention of Iran. But also we see this revisionism based on some kind of a rewriting of the history, whether it's Russian President Putin saying that Ukrainian nation does not have a right to have a state, or in Iran, Ayatollah's regime saying that Israel should not have a state. That's all part of the bigger problem, and we see these symptoms. And these symptoms will stay in place unless we find the solution of a new global order and the international institutions that will be able not only to assess the problem, but react properly. And the current institutions are unable to do, whether you look at the UN, OSCE, or any other institution. And these escalations will be constantly having different effect, and each side will try to have their own interpretation. But the core of the problem is that not only Trump administration or even Biden administration, but it started much earlier, in 2007, when this type of aggressive revisionism was declared, and everyone tried to maximize their positions, testing the red lines, whether they are really red or not. And every time the rogue actors found that the red lines are a bit blurred, maybe pinkish, they moved ahead using force, using blackmailing. And importantly enough to see, it was not only maintaining power internally in their own country, but also projecting their ability of disrupting affairs in other countries. So we see, for example, Iranian regime trying to find tools to disrupt the different countries, hiring the hitmen to assassinate their targets. The same is what the Russia is doing, hiring the hitmen and assassinating their political enemies. China is resorting this to same type of tactics. So all these components, if we combine together, illustrates the trajectory where the world order is going. And unless there will be a solution to it in a broader, legitimate international level, we constantly will face that type of disruptions. And every side will try to maximize their ability to negotiate, and it really looks like a more terrorist tactics, for example, closing down Hormuz Straits or monopolizing critical mineral supply or energy embargo or anti-access area denial for Taiwan or the Ukraine. So all these are like a connected vessels, connecting problems. And therefore, at some point, this would have erupted in a bigger scale of problem, which we see now. And what current Trump administration is doing, whether one might like it or not, but this administration has a desire to act. Whatever the results will be, it needs to be seen yet. But largely, we are bearing the consequences or the costs of inaction as well. Mm-hmm. And all these symptoms were slowly appearing on the screen, but there was less desire or less political will to counteract or neglect it and trying to maintain business as usual, for example, with Russia or with Iran, while they were employing some type of a terrorist tactics to manipulate with the interest or having a disruptive leverages in other countries or globally. So again, the cost of elections that we are paying price right now, unfortunately, bears a very heavy cost of the individual human lives. Again, part of this type of hybrid warfare is it's a bad word to say, but democratizing or making the wars more part of the daily civilian life, mm-hmm. weaponizing children, weaponizing the humanitarian corridors, whether it's putting weapons in the schools or hospitals or blocking the wheat supply from Ukraine to Africa and other parts of the world. This is all the weaponization of the daily life. And we will witness it even aggravated more unless there will be some decisive actions.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Now, let me include Ms. Devasha Pant. Devasha, what led us here? I mean, all this escalation that we're hearing of just now in this breaking news, and way before, I mean, we were getting reports that the negotiations between the United States and Iran were going well. I mean, with the Omani mediation, and then we had this 100 days war, and Pakistan perhaps stepped up here for mediation to solve the situation, and then we even received reports that the Pakistani interior minister is in Tehran technically trying to prevent a catastrophe, and then here we go again.
Mm-hmm. So, what we're watching here in real time is a structural argument playing out in a diplomatic threat. Pakistan's Interior Minister Naqvi is on his third visit to Tehran in recent weeks, and I see this as not opportunism, but more as a sustained institutionalized engagement. He's carrying written messages from both Prime Minister and the Army Chief directly to Iran's supreme leader, and we have to ask, why Pakistan? Because you see, Western diplomatic frameworks have been exhausted by their own contradictions, and the US and Israel launched strikes on Iran on February 28th, as mentioned before, obliterating any pretense of good faith diplomacy before talks could even begin. So again, what credibility is Washington carrying out to a negotiating table that it has bombed its way into, right? And you see, the West hasn't really lost any credibility overnight, but it has rather spent decades over decades mortgaging it through selective outreach, double standard on sovereignty, and a UN Security Council that has been wielded more as a geopolitical instrument than a peace architecture. And Pakistan, by contrast, is carrying something the West cannot currently offer, which is the legitimacy without precondition. And it is the only it is a Muslim majority state, a nuclear power, a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, trusted enough by Washington to have hosted the April US-Iran direct talks, and trusted enough by Tehran to receive messages from the supreme leader. That simultaneity is precisely what a mediation really requires. So right now, we aren't really witnessing Pakistan step in, but a global South demonstrating that peace is in their agenda right now. However, we still have to see how things unfold as we progress through today.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Now let me bring back Dr. Anas At-Takriti. Dr. Anas, Washington champions this fragile ceasefire with Iran, yet simultaneously provides the weaponry and political cover for Israel's relentless bombardment of Lebanon, as you said earlier. How does the international community, and specifically the Global South, reconcile this glaring hypocrisy where international law is seemingly applied when it serves American or Israeli, in this case, strategic interests?
I mean, I think that it goes without saying that the only winner, and I think that I alluded to this in my initial answer, the only winner of this particular conflict and in its carrying on is Israel. I would contend that both the Americans as well as the Iranians are quite keen on finding some sort of resolution that would save face, and therefore the negotiations. And by the way, just carrying on from what Ms. Pant had just stated, the Interior Minister of Pakistan went to Tehran on the instructions, or let's put it politely, the request of President Trump in order to deliver a message to the Supreme Leader. As he was in Tehran, he got a message saying, forget about it, because Trump is going in a totally different direction, and it proved totally futile. The fact of the matter is that Pakistan is in a no-win situation. When this started and Pakistan stood in to mediate, there was a lot of capital for Pakistan to gain. and it was keen on trying to make the most of this particular opportunity. And Pakistan, I agree entirely with what Davish has said regarding that it was in good stead to actually make some gains. But the fact is that you're in an impossible situation when you're mediating between the Americans and Israelis from one side and the Iranians, where at least on one side, there is an actual determination not to end hostilities. You must understand that any agreement reached that would end hostilities is against the best interest of Israel as it sees it. And America is let's put it clearly, America is at the behest of Israel. America entered this foolish escapade at the behest of Israel. And it's not going to end on its own terms. This is not going to end good for the United States, and it won't end well for the Iranians. The only beneficiary is Israel. Now, in regards with the international community, I feel that we as the world population, we as the world order, if you like, we are in crisis mode because of this hypocrisy, because of this irregularity with dealing with the very same structures that we constructed since World War II. We only use them when it befits us, and that is no way to run the world, and particularly to run a situation where there are hostilities such as the one in Iran today. I feel that we are in a very, very difficult position, and whatever the outcome is, even if somehow we arrive at ending the hostilities, the world will come to face some extremely difficult questions. And the next phase, the next 10, 20, 30 years will stand on how we address these issues and these questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Anas Atikriti, and a very quick round of questions to the rest of the guests as we wrap up this special. Ambassador Katelia, if we look at the recent Donald Trump-Xi summit in Beijing, we saw an American president ostensibly seeking Chinese leverage to contain a war of Washington's own making. So does this summit not expose a fatal flaw in the U.S. establishment's thinking that in waging a costly war in the Middle East, Washington has inadvertently surrendered critical strategic leverage to Beijing?
Well, I don't think that Washington surrendered any leverages. I wouldn't rush with the conclusions yet for several reasons. First of all, when it comes to the strategic balancing, China plays a very constructive role in terms of the strategic balance. And whenever, for example, Russian President Putin cyber-rattles the nuclear weapons, China makes a very solid point that this is unacceptable, then this is a red line. So that comes to the strategic balance. Of course, we've seen China's dependence also, the global commodities like oil and the Gulf oil supplies and supply chain. On the other hand, we see the rest of the world depends on critical minerals monopolization by China in terms of the defense production or microchip production. And these are more, let's say, 1 degree lower issues than strategic balance globally. And if US-Chinese relations will prevent Russia in a longer run to use nuclear weapons as a source of the blackmailing rest of the world, that would be a very good first outcome of this interaction. Another important component, which I think is quite clear here, and again, well, whenever we discuss China, Iran, of course, we should not avoid elephant or bear in the room, which is Russia. And the war Russia waged against the Ukraine, because the outcome of this war will decide many other components. If Russia will be allowed to succeed, one way or another Ukraine, we might see that it the spillover and other countries behaving in the same way. For example, China against Taiwan, or Iran again going more aggressively against Israel.
Amazing.
Or maybe also that expanding in the rest of the world. So that's a kind of short recipe to the chaos. And then the last point to see, unfortunately, at this stage, when, as I said, the global international rules-based order is gone, and until we have a new order, it's hard to speak about neutrality or kind of a universal standards. Yes, as U.S. Secretary Rubio rightly said, Russia is not in, U.S. is not neutral in Russia-Ukraine conflict, or U.S. is not neutral in Iran-Israel conflict, because Iran declared U.S. as an enemy, and Israel and the United States have a strategic partnership and a lot of in common, including democracy and democratic system of the governance.
So, in light of what you just said,
it's
Ambassador,
important to keep.
Thank you, Ambassador, because we're nearing the end. And in light of what you just raised as a point, let me redirect this question very quickly to Dr. Khudr Zarour. Dr. Khudr, to what extent are pro-Israel hardliners in Washington willing to risk U.S. global standing and military readiness simply to act as the military wing for Tel Aviv's regional ambitions?
I think some leaders in the Pentagon are raising a major concern about Israeli influence on defense establishment. Certainly, the Joint Chief of Staff has raised those concerns the last few days. It's becoming a major issue. Most of the wars since 2003 have been directed from Tel Aviv, especially from Mr. Netanyahu himself. So Netanyahu is doing this for a greater Israel project, and that's what we have seen, a kind of destruction of southern Lebanon, Gaza, the West Bank. And one area that we have neglected to talk about was the southeastern part of Syria. That has been a third of Syria has been colonized the last few months by the Israeli forces. So that has been ignored by the U.S., by Washington, and most Western governments. So that is, we need to find a way to contain Israeli aggression in the region. And all this boils to one point, and that's really important. We haven't talked about it in a long time, and that is the creation or recreation of the state of Palestine. All those issues, all those difficulties and challenges we face in the Middle East because there is no Palestinian state. We have to be pushing for that. We had more peaceful coexistence in the 90s when we had the Oslo Accords. We have an understanding, we had a mechanism in place where we're talking about peace and Land for Peace project. That has been ignored.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Khudr Zarour. And now, as a last question to Devasha Pant. Devasha, quickly, the unilateral U.S. naval blockade on Iran has rattled global energy markets, plunging nations into austerity and also sparking fuel crises. From the perspective of the global South, is Washington weaponizing the global economy to force Iranian capitulation? And how sustainable is this strategy before an international economic revolt occurs?
Well, let's be precise about what the blockade has actually done. Iran's crude oil export have collapsed by nearly 89%, from approximately 1.9 million barrels per day in March to just 209,000 by May. And that has stripped Tehran of nearly $6 billion in oil revenue. But here is the critical point that often gets buried. The Strait of Hormuz carries 20% of the world's daily oil supply, and disrupting it does not just hurt Iran, it detonates across the entire global South. The Brent crude surpassed $99 a barrel when the blockade was announced. Goldman Sachs warned that a sustained blockade past 90 days risks triggering a global recession by the third quarter of 2026. And, this is not a collateral damage. And from a human rights and political economy lens, this is a coercive strategy that outsources sufferings into nations with the least capacity to absorb it. Pakistan's own defense minister, Asif, has said plainly, we were in a recovery phase, but this war But because of this war, our economy has suffered badly. And the weaponization of economic interdependence, what scholars like Henry Farrell and Abraham Newman call it weaponized interdependence, this is not new, but its application here is particularly destabilizing because the global south is not party to this conflict. They have not voted for this war, and yet they are paying for it in fuel costs, in atrocities, austerities, and in food prices. And the question of sustainability is the right one to ask right now, because history tells us economic coercion without a clear political off-ramp radicalizes the very population it's meant to pressure, and it erodes the legitimacy of coercing power far faster than it erodes the target.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We will have to leave it there, unfortunately. My immense gratitude and thanks to all my panel, Devasha Pant, Dr. Anas Takriti, Ambassador Batuk Attilya, and Dr. Khadr Zarour, all for your invaluable insights tonight. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. The geopolitical center of gravity is shifting rapidly while Washington continues to deploy its military might to protect Israeli interests, risking its own strategic readiness and domestic stability. It is nations like Pakistan and China that are actively attempting to engineer a diplomatic off-ramp. The frantic shadow diplomacy we are witnessing in Tehran today, coupled with the economic anxieties dominating global markets, proves that the era of uncontested Western military adventurism is meeting fierce resistance from a multipolar world. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in, and until next time, have a good one.